The 11th day began the same way the first 10 had, in silence. I had learned over the course of 3 deep survey deployments that silence in space is not the absence of information. It is the accumulation of it. You run cold, you run dark, you let the sensors do the work your engines would otherwise drown out, and the universe fills in. Radiation signatures, gravitational harmonics, mineral density readings from bodies that have never been touched by any hand, organic compound traces in atmospheric bands that no instrument has ever sampled. The universe talks constantly. Most ships are too loud to hear it. The TFSN Relentless Archive was not most ships. She was a long-hull survey cruiser, one of 4 in her class, built around a sensor array so large it occupied the forward third of the vessel. A bristling lattice of dishes, apertures, spectrographic booms, and passive receivers that made the bow look like something between an industrial scaffold and the skeleton of a cathedral. The habitation block and the engineering core were tucked behind it, small and unassuming, as though the ship's designers had quietly acknowledged what the vessel was actually for and had assigned the rear 2/3 accordingly, afterthoughts to house the people keeping the sensors running. She was not beautiful. She had no graceful lines, no swept-back profile that would have read as warlike or fleet-born. She looked to the uninitiated eye exactly like what she was, a machine purpose-built for patience. The Terran Fleet Survey Navigational Corps had been operating vessels like her for 22 years. The doctrine was simple in its conception and demanding in its execution. Arrive ahead of the boundary, run cold, run long, record everything. The survey mandate was total gravitational mapping, stellar cartography, mineralogical assay, atmospheric sampling, electromagnetic history reconstruction, the works. A deep survey run lasted a minimum of 90 days, and in those 90 days every body in the designated zone above a minimum cross-section was catalogued, logged, and entered into the permanent record, with a precision that the core quality standards did not allow to be negotiated. The archive was 11 days into hours, which meant we were not yet an eighth of the way through what we had come here to do. I was the commanding officer of that ship, Captain Elise Vardner, Fleet Survey Navigational Corps, 21 years in service, 3 prior deep survey commands before this one. And on the morning of the 11th day, I was sitting in my command chair on the bridge, drinking black coffee from a ceramic mug that had survived 2 prior deployments, chipped at the rim from the time it had been knocked from a shelf during a correction burn on the Delavar survey, cracked faintly along one side from a pressurization incident on the Koreth run, and reading the overnight summary from my senior analyst, Lieutenant Commander Petra Oswin. The summary was 43 pages. I had learned to read quickly. Oswin had been with me for 4 years. She was a compact, precise woman in her late 30s, with a background in applied astrophysics and the peculiar quality of mind that very good senior analysts share. She treated the instruments as colleagues, not tools. She talked to the sensor array the way a good carpenter talks to good wood, not out of sentimentality, but out of respect for what well-made things could tell you if you were patient enough to listen. On 3 of the 11 previous mornings, she had been on the bridge before me, not because she was required to be, but because something in the overnight data had interested her enough that she had not wanted to sleep. I considered this among her better qualities. The Vethoran gradient is doing something interesting in Sector 9, she said from the station to my left without looking up from her display. She had the kind of voice that treated interesting as a technical designation rather than an expression of enthusiasm. After 4 years serving under me, she had learned that this was how I preferred it. Interesting how, I said. The tidal harmonics suggest a subsurface liquid layer on the 4th moon. We've been logging anomalous thermal variance since day 7. I flagged it in the day 7 summary, but the confidence interval was too low to annotate. Last night's passive sweep added 9 additional data points and the interval has moved. Not enough yet, but the direction is consistent. She paused, considering. I want to extend the passive array sweep by 6 degrees eastward, and run it another 48 hours before I make a formal notation. If the pattern holds, we're looking at something real. Do it, I said. She nodded, made a note on her board, and went back to her display. That was a typical 11 seconds on the bridge of the relentless archive. We were a crew of 47 in total. 11 of those were the sensor and analysis team, which was disproportionately large by any fleet standard and intentionally so. The archive's mission was measurement, and measurement required people who understood what they were measuring. The rest were the people required to keep a ship operational in deep space for 90-plus days: engineers, medical, comms, drone operations, 3 officers in the command rotation including myself. There was no combat station aboard the archive because the doctrine did not call for one. We carried no offensive armament. We had 4 point defense batteries for debris hazard, 2 electronic countermeasure packages of the passive variety, and a tight beam emergency transmitter capable of punching a distress signal through a gas giant's magnetosphere. That was the full extent of our martial capacity. This was deliberate. The survey doctrine held that a deep survey vessel needed to be exactly what it appeared to be: a scientific instrument in the service of legal record keeping. Ambiguity was the enemy of long-run data collection. A warship that happened to carry telescopes would be treated as a warship by any party that encountered it, and a warship occupying a pending designation corridor raised political questions that the Survey Corps had no mandate to answer. A hull that looked like a university research vessel extended on deep assignment would be treated accordingly. We are here to look. We mean nothing by it. We will be gone when we are done. The archive and her sisters had been built to be legible, and in being legible they had been, paradoxically, far more effective at their actual purpose than a warship could ever have been. I believed in the doctrine. I had believed in it since the first time I'd commanded one of these runs, 12 years ago now, watching a sensor log fill with data that no human instrument had ever captured before, in a system that had not existed in any catalog, around a star that had burned for 4 billion years without ever being seen. There is a particular quality to that kind of work: unhurried, total. The universe does not rush to be known, and neither should the people who intend to know it. The gas giant Vethoron occupied the center of our current sector, which was formally designated the Sesavith Corridor, a stretch of buffer space between the acknowledged boundary of Terran survey jurisdiction and the edge of what the Sesthari Compact called their administrative perimeter. The corridor was, in the technical language of the boundary accords, pending formal designation. In practical terms, this meant that neither the Compact nor the Terran Navigational Authority had formally claimed it, which was exactly why the archive was here. Survey claim precedes administrative claim. That was the doctrine, and it was also, as it happened, the law as written in the Outer Boundary Settlement of 43 years ago, a document the Compact had signed along with 7 other signatories, in the formal proceeding that had established the boundary framework for the entire outer perimeter. I knew this because I had read the relevant sections before departure. All of them, not just the article summaries. I made a habit of reading the legal framework around any survey zone I entered. It was, I had found over the years, more useful than it sounded. Day 11 passed as the previous 10 had. The array extended its sweep per Oswin's request. The 4th moon of Vethoron continued to suggest a subsurface ocean in its thermal variance, building its case data point by data point with the kind of patience that geological time teaches matter and that good scientists learn to imitate. My junior analyst, Ensign Tavarhalis, identified a previously uncatalogued impact crater field on the 3rd moon and spent most of the afternoon building a formation model, an attempt to reconstruct the event sequence from the distribution of ejecta, which was the kind of problem that required both solid mathematics and a willingness to let the numbers tell you what they wanted to tell you rather than what you expected. He presented it to Oswin with the barely contained energy of someone who had found a thing and was proud of having found it, and who had not yet fully learned to separate the finding from the work that remained. She reviewed it in 3 minutes, told him his mass distribution model had an error in the 6th crater cluster. The ejecta pattern was inconsistent with the proposed impact angle, and the numbers would not resolve correctly until he corrected for the lateral rotation of the moon at time of impact, showed him exactly where, and sent him back to fix it. He went chastened, jaw set in the particular way of someone who is more frustrated with themselves than with the person who found the error. He would get it right. He always did in the end. I reviewed the navigation logs that evening, as I did every evening, and verified our position relative to the corridor's designated center line. We were holding stationary at a depth of approximately 11,000 kilometers inside the orbital shadow of Vethoron's upper atmosphere, running on minimum thrust to hold station against the planet's considerable gravitational draw. The shadow gave us additional thermal masking on top of our standard cold-running protocols. Our electromagnetic footprint, already minimal, was further reduced by the planet's own radiated noise, drowning out the residual output of our station-keeping drives. It was not that we were hiding. Deep survey vessels did not hide. The doctrine was explicit on this point. We were simply being efficient about our power consumption, and the shadow was convenient for that purpose. I noted our position in the log with care, initialed it, and went to sleep. On the morning of the 12th day, my comms officer, Lieutenant Sina Frake, knocked on my cabin door at 4:11. "Captain," she said through the door, "you'll want to be on the bridge." I was dressed and out of my cabin in 90 seconds. Frake was a compact woman with the composed manner of someone who had been in difficult situations before, and had formed a settled opinion about the relative usefulness of urgency versus composure in them, which was that composure was almost always more useful. The fact that she had come to my door in person rather than using the intercom was the significant signal. She was not a person given to unnecessary gestures. If she had decided the situation warranted coming to the door, then the situation warranted my physical presence on the bridge. That was a meaningful distinction, and I read it correctly. On the bridge, the passive array was showing new signatures. I read them over Oswin's shoulder. She had been there ahead of me, which told me Frake had knocked on her door first, or that Oswin had simply not slept. 7 contacts, bearing inbound from the corridor's western entry point. Drive signatures, and not passive ones, running full, which meant they were either unconcerned about detection or actively choosing to be visible. The formation was tight, less than 2,000 kilometers between hulls at the wide points, which indicated practiced coordination rather than coincidental assembly. The drive signatures were varied, at least 3 distinct propulsion types, which meant this was a multi-vessel group drawn from more than one design tradition. I read the electromagnetic profile building at the leading edge of the formation and felt something settle into place in my understanding of the situation. The way pieces settle when you have been looking at the same problem long enough that the answer begins to make itself obvious. "Compact registry," Oswin said, her voice holding its technical register with no inflection of alarm. "Yes," I said. I had already seen the registry markers in the M profile. The Sesthari compact used a specific beacon standard for formal administrative operations, a structured signal pattern that was distinct from their civilian or military traffic, and which meant that whoever was driving those 7 hulls was doing something official. The Sesthari compact was a parliamentary body formed from 9 species who occupied the arc of space, running roughly spinward from the corridor. They had existed as a formal polity for 212 years. Their administrative style was, by all accounts I had read, procedurally precise in the way that multi-species governance tends to be when the alternative is endless jurisdictional disputes. They like to do things in the proper order, with the proper documentation, at the proper time, and they had built 2 centuries of institutional practice around that preference. A 7-ship delegation moving at full drive into a pending designation corridor, broadcasting formal administrative registry markers, was not an exploratory probe. They were here to do something specific, and given the corridor's status and the composition of the incoming group, I had a clear picture of what that was. They were here to file a formal territorial designation for the Sesavith corridor. "Hull type read?" I asked. "Working on it," said Ensign Darv, my sensor watch officer from the forward station. He was a young man with a careful attention to his instruments that I had found consistently reliable. 3 of them are administrative-class vessels, standard compact bureaucratic hull, the kind they use for formal proceedings. Heavy documentation arrays, not much else. 2 are Savathi patrol frigates, light armament, presence class. The 6th one, he paused, checking the beacon against the database. "That's a compact, formal designation ship. I'm reading the official registry beacon. It's specifically a designation authority vessel. The 7th is a Kethrin diplomatic tender, heavy class." I considered that lineup in full. Administrative vessels to produce and execute the filing. Patrol frigates for visible presence. Not a threat posture, just the formal acknowledgement that the compact considered this a significant administrative action worth backing with visible authority. A designation authority ship to make the claim legally binding the moment it was filed. A diplomatic tender as a contingency instrument, in case they encountered complications requiring negotiation. They had assembled exactly what you would assemble for a major corridor designation. They had come prepared to do this properly. "How long until they reach our position?" I said. "At their current drive, approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes. Their trajectory is going to bring them directly through this sector. They're not surveying, they're proceeding to a specific point. They'll be in passive sensor range of our position in approximately 40 minutes. Darv studied his board. "Captain, at this range, with our emissions profile, we're going to read to their sensors as a thermal mass associated with the planet's shadow. We're not likely to resolve as a distinct contact for them until they're at significantly closer range, maybe 20 minutes after they're in range." I stood at the center of the bridge and thought about it for 30 seconds. Not longer, because I had read the legal situation carefully before departure, and the relevant answers were clear. The correct procedure in this situation was specified in standing orders. When a deep survey vessel encountered foreign ships in a survey zone, the protocol was: maintain your run, do not initiate contact, and respond to contact with full disclosure of your identity, your mandate, and your survey dates, including a complete copy of the survey logs accumulated to that point. The disclosure package was automatic. It was built into the comms system and could be transmitted with a single authorization. I had reviewed it on day 1 to confirm it was complete. It was. I was not going to wait for them to initiate. That had been clear to me from the moment I read the formation and understood what they were here to do. Waiting for them to initiate meant letting them arrive, letting them begin their formal proceedings, letting them get 2 hours into a territorial designation process before I announced that there was already an occupancy record standing in the corridor. That was not wrong, the standing orders permitted it, but it was not the right way to handle the situation. There is a difference between what you are permitted to do and what the situation actually calls for. I had enough experience with difficult conversations to know that beginning one at the moment of maximum surprise for the other party rarely led to the best outcome. "Frake," I said, "get me a channel to their command vessel. Open frequency, standard compact diplomatic band." She looked at me for exactly 1 beat, not questioning, just confirming that she had understood correctly and filing the decision in her record of the situation, and then turned to her board. "Oswin," I said next, "I want a full passive array data package prepared for transmission. Everything we have from day 1, the complete survey log, the notation archive, all cartographic data, all mineral assays, all atmospheric readings, all electromagnetic records, the full working files. Formatted for compact receiving systems. Standard disclosure package everything. That's going to take about 40 minutes to compile and package, she said. Their systems use a different compression standard. I'll need to convert the cartographic data before transmission, or they won't be able to open it properly. Do it right, I said. You have 40 minutes. Captain, said Frake. Channel open. You have the command vessel of the compact delegation. She's identifying as the CDV presiding voice. That's a second-tier parliamentary administrative ship. I have a duty officer on the line. I sat down in the command chair, smoothed the front of my duty jacket, and spoke into the open channel clearly and without hurry. This is Captain Elise Vardner, commanding officer of the Terran Fleet Survey Navigational Ship Relentless Archive. We are stationed in the Sesavith Corridor at position Echo 9 or 7, orbital depth 11,000 kilometers from Vethoran's atmospheric boundary, day 12 of a 90-day survey mandate issued under Terran Navigational Authority Charter, Article 7. I am transmitting our registry beacon and survey authorization codes now. I would appreciate if you would relay this contact to your senior officer at your earliest convenience. There was a pause of about 8 seconds. Then the duty officer's voice came back, a translated rendering, our systems handling the conversion from compact VESI, the administrative language the 9-species parliament used for official matters. The translation was smooth. Compact administrative VESI was engineered for clarity across species, which made it well-suited to good translation. The compact had been doing formal, multilingual communication for 212 years, and they were very good at it. This is Officer of Watch Coordinator Thevra's, CDV presiding voice. Please stand by. We are relaying your contact to senior staff. Then silence. They had effectively put us on hold, which I expected. A duty officer receiving a contact announcement of this kind needed to hand it upward immediately. Oswin, I said without moving from the chair, how is the package coming? 37 minutes, she said. The cartographic data is converting. Everything else is compiling in parallel. Good. I looked at the display showing the formation's position and trajectory. Still inbound, no deviation in course, no drive adjustment. They had not yet decided how to react to my contact. Darv, keep tracking the formation. Note any change in drive signature or heading. Yes, ma'am. I waited. Around me, the bridge ran at its survey mission tempo. Quiet, focused, the sound of instrument readings being updated and logged, of Holly's working at the back station with the tight concentration of someone who was aware that something significant was happening beyond his immediate purview, but who had been given no instruction to do anything other than keep his own work current and correct. He was running the impact formation model again, correcting the mass distribution error. The gas giant turned slowly in the viewport beyond the forward display, amber and cream, and a deep bruised orange, where the storm bands pressed against each other in the upper atmosphere. And the sun of this system, a yellow-white main sequence star 212 million kilometers sunward, was putting a hard rim of light along Vethoran's curvature that turned the planet's upper limb into something very close to beautiful. I had been looking at it for 11 days without growing tired of it. The fourth moon was a pale shape against the gas giant's eastern band, barely resolved at this distance, keeping its secret for now. The channel opened again at the 32-minute mark. Captain Vardner. The voice was different from the duty officer's, older, with weight in it. Our systems identified the speaker from the formalized preamble that preceded every senior compact official's verbal communication. Presiding Coordinator Kelveth Oram, second-tier administrative lead of the delegation. The title placed this person as the senior authority aboard after the delegation's designated head, who was almost certainly the formal designator, the official empowered to actually file the territorial claim. The fact that Oram had come to the channel rather than the designator told me they were still in the process of deciding how to read the situation. I am told you are claiming a survey position in the Sesavith corridor. I am not claiming one, I said, keeping my voice level and civil. I am disclosing one. I have occupied this survey position for 12 days. My presence is a matter of existing fact, not a claim in the assertive sense. I am transmitting the full survey record as we speak. It will arrive at your receiving arrays in approximately 8 minutes. I would ask you to review it before we continue the conversation. We will review it, Oram said. Is there anything you wish to add before we do? Only that I'd encourage your analysts to pay particular attention to the cartographic data from days 1 and 2, I said. The gravitational mapping of the corridor is complete for the inner zone. I think you will find it useful. A brief pause. Thank you, Captain. Please stand by. The channel went to standby. The package arrived at their receiving arrays on schedule. I watched the transmission confirmation register in Frakes display. 461 terabytes of raw data and compiled notation. The complete 12-day record of the relentless archives operations in the Sesavith corridor, formatted for compact receiving systems, compressed appropriately, index intact. Oswin had, as she always did, done the work correctly. The message embedded in that file was not written anywhere in it. It did not need to be. What the file said without saying it was as plain as anything I had ever transmitted. We have been here. We arrived before you. We were in this system when it was silent and unvisited, and we have spent 12 days reading it carefully, and what you are looking at is the record of that reading. Before you file anything, before you proceed with whatever you came here to do, understand what you are looking at. This is not an assertion. This is a fact, and facts have a particular quality. They do not care whether you were prepared for them. I had some idea of what was happening aboard the presiding voice while we waited. The survey package was substantial, and the Compact's analysts would need time to process what they were receiving. The first priority would be the authorization codes, verifying that the survey mandate was legitimate, which it was, and that the disclosure procedure had been followed correctly, which it had. The second priority would be the cartographic data, because the corridor's cartographic record was the foundation of any prior occupancy determination. When they opened those files and saw the resolution we had achieved, 0.003 gravitational units per cubic kilometer across the entire inner zone, a standard deep survey hull running at full passive sensitivity for 12 days, they would understand that this was not an exploratory probe. This was a survey record. A complete one, built on methodology they had apparently not encountered before. The third thing their analysts would reach was the temporal record, Day 1 timestamp, verified by independent navigation log, 12 continuous days. The survey mandate authorized 90, 78 days remaining. We were not almost done, we were just getting started. 26 minutes later, Oram came back on the channel. Captain Vardner, my delegation has begun reviewing your survey record. This will take some time. It is a substantial file. I have an initial procedural question, which I would like to ask now before the review is complete. The voice had a quality I was beginning to learn to read, the careful construction of someone choosing their words not to deceive but to be precise, because the situation they were navigating was one where imprecision could produce consequences they had not authorized. Of course, I said. Your survey mandate, you stated it was issued under Terran Navigational Authority Charter, Article 7. We have checked our records. We have no formal notification of a Terran survey operation in this corridor. Article 7 of the Outer Boundary Settlement does not require advance notification of survey operations in buffer zones pending formal designation, I said, keeping the tone matter-of-fact rather than corrective. Survey operations in pending designation corridors are self-authorizing under the Charter as long as they are disclosed upon contact with any other party operating in the zone. I made that disclosure immediately upon contact with your delegation, as required. My survey logs constitute that disclosure in full. There was a pause, the consulting pause, not the thinking pause. They were checking the text. "That is correct," Orem said, after a period that suggested someone had actually pulled the document and verified the reference rather than simply accepting my characterization. "Article 7 does carry that provision." The careful voice again. "A second question. The gravitational mapping data in your cartographic files. The resolution indicated is 0.003 gravitational units per cubic kilometer for the inner zone. Our own cartographic records for this region do not approach that resolution. This is considerably more thorough than standard survey practice. It's within the standard operating parameters for a deep survey hull of this class," I said. "The Relentless Archive was built specifically for this kind of work. We don't carry weapons and we don't carry additional crew. That capacity was allocated to additional array apertures and processing systems. This is what a deep survey run produces when you give a proper instrument 90 days and leave it alone to work. The record you're looking at represents 12 of those 90 days." A longer pause. "I see," said Orem, and there was something in that phrase that told me the coordinator was doing more than processing the technical information, was beginning to understand the shape of the situation in full. "Captain Vardner, please stand by. I need to consult with my delegation before we can proceed further." "Of course," I said, "we'll be here." The channel went back to standby. I looked at Darv. "Formation status." "They've decelerated significantly," Darv said, studying his board. "Current reading puts them at station-keeping velocity. They're not proceeding any further inbound. Approximately 44,000 kilometers from our position." He looked up briefly. "They've stopped." "Good," I said. "Oswin, flag the fourth moon thermal data for a follow-up sweep this afternoon. We still have a full day's work." She did not look up from her display, already scheduled. The next 4 hours and 17 minutes proceeded in a manner that I expect would have seemed incongruous to anyone who did not understand the nature of deep survey work. The Relentless Archive and her crew returned, without ceremony or discussion, to the task at hand. Hollis corrected his impact formation model. Oswin reviewed and approved it. The afternoon thermal sweep of Vethoran's fourth moon added 12 additional data points to the subsurface liquid hypothesis, bringing the confidence interval to the point where Oswin began a preliminary annotation entry, pending further confirmation. My engineering officer, Chief Machinist's mate Davorin Cass, submitted a routine maintenance request on one of the secondary cooling loops and received my approval in the standard form. Frakes Comms Rating completed a scheduled signal strength test on the tight beam emergency transmitter and logged the results as nominal. The compact delegation sat 44,000 kilometers away in formation and held its internal consultations. At the 2:19 mark of hour 4, Frakes said, "Captain, the presiding voice is hailing again." "Put them through." Orem's voice, the careful quality more pronounced than before, I had been learning its gradations. "Captain Vardner, my delegation has completed an initial review of your survey record. I want to be transparent with you about where that review has brought us, because I believe the situation warrants transparency." "I appreciate that," I said. "Your survey mandate is valid. The disclosure procedure was followed correctly. The survey record itself is a pause that felt like someone selecting a word carefully from a range of options. Thorough, considerably more thorough than we had anticipated encountering in a pending designation corridor." Another pause. "The prior occupancy provisions of the outer boundary settlement are clear. A formal administrative designation cannot be recorded over a documented prior survey occupancy without the agreement of the surveying party. Your 12 days of continuous, documented survey operation in this corridor constitute a prior occupancy record under those provisions." "Yes," I said. "We are not in a position to contest that record." "I didn't expect you would be," I said. "The record is what it is." a longer silence than the previous ones. Then, Captain Vardner, before I relay the delegation's formal position, I need to ask you something, outside the formal record. Go ahead. How many other corridors are you in? I had known this question was coming, in the way you know a particular reading on the thermal variance data is coming when the pattern has been building consistently for days, not with certainty, but with a kind of settled anticipation. I had thought about how to answer it honestly without making it into something larger than it needed to be. The Survey Corps currently has 14 deep survey hulls on active deployment, I said. 4 in my class, long-hull survey cruisers with full passive array complements. The other 10 are shorter duration hulls running modified 90-day protocols. All 14 are currently on active runs in pending designation corridor zones. A pause, then the rest of it, because they needed to understand the whole picture. The Corps has been conducting continuous deep survey operations in outer buffer corridors for 22 years. When one ship finishes a survey run and files its record, the next ship is already in position in the next designated zone. We don't leave gaps in the deployment schedule. The silence that followed this was different in quality from all the previous silences. It was not the consulting silence or the processing silence or the careful word selection silence. It was the silence of a very large fact being absorbed. I let it run. I did not fill it. 22 years, Oram said finally. Continuous. Yes. Another silence, shorter this time. Captain, I need to relay this conversation to my delegation. Please stand by. During the 51 minutes the channel was closed, the archive kept working. That was simply what we did. The mineral assay readings from the asteroid belt's inner ring continued to compile. The fourth moon's thermal record added another data point to its subsurface ocean case. Holly's completed his corrected formation model for the third moon's impact field and submitted it to Oswin a second time, with the mass distribution numbers adjusted and the lateral rotation correction applied. She reviewed it in 4 minutes and told him it was satisfactory, which was as close to praise as she gave during a survey run. He logged it and moved on to the next notation item in his queue. The bridge ran as it always ran, measured, focused, the instruments doing their patient work without regard for what was happening 44,000 kilometers out in the corridor, where a 7-ship compact delegation was, by my best estimate, in the middle of a significant internal conversation. I had some picture of what that conversation looked like. The delegation had come with a plan, a complete, authorized, properly documented administrative plan, and the plan had just encountered a fact it had not been designed to accommodate. In a parliamentary body of 9 species, assembled under formal authority and operating under procedural rules that governed every step of the designation process, encountering an unanticipated fact of this kind would require a specific kind of internal management. Who speaks to the human captain next? At what rank? With what authority? And what does that person say? These were not simple questions when the relevant decision involved withdrawing a formal designation, filing that the compact's parliamentary authority had explicitly authorized. The fact that it took 51 minutes told me something. Not alarm, not hostility, those would have produced a faster and less careful response. 51 minutes was the sound of a bureaucracy doing its procedural thinking, which was a sound I had learned to respect. They were doing it right. When they came back to the channel, it was not Oram. The preamble in the communication header identified this as Senior Designator Velatin Rose, Office of Formal Administration, Sesthari Compact Parliamentary Authority, the rank above Oram's. They had escalated the conversation to the designator, the official who had come specifically to file the territorial claim, and who was therefore the official who held the authority to not file it. I straightened slightly in the command chair, without particularly meaning to. "Captain Vardner," said Rose. The voice was measured and crisp, and carried the professional composure of someone senior enough to have sat in difficult conversations before. I have been fully briefed on your survey record and on your conversation with presiding coordinator Oram. I would like to speak plainly, if that is acceptable to you. Please do, I said. My delegation formally recognizes your prior occupancy record in the Sesavith corridor as valid under the terms of the outer boundary settlement. We are not contesting it. Thank you, I said. I appreciate you saying so directly. I want to add something further, Captain, and I want to be clear that I am speaking as the senior formal authority of this delegation, and not making an informal personal statement. The careful quality, more pronounced than Oram had used it, the kind of care that comes from saying something in a formal context that is going into a formal record. The Sesthari Compact is withdrawing its designation filing for the Sesavith corridor. We will update the corridor's administrative status in our records to reflect the prior occupancy record you have established. The corridor will be formally noted as a Terran Navigational Authority active survey zone for the duration of your mandate. That's the correct procedure, I said. Yes, it is. A pause. Captain Vardner, I'm also going to say something that is not part of the formal exchange. I ask that you understand it in that spirit. Of course. We were not aware, Rose said, carefully and slowly, that the Terran Navigational Authority had been conducting systematic deep survey operations in outer buffer corridor zones for 22 years on a continuous deployment schedule. This information was not present in our planning assessments for this operation, or in any of our recent administrative planning more broadly. The careful voice became more careful. This is a significant gap in our situational awareness. One that I expect the compact will need to address. I imagine you will, I said. I kept my own voice entirely level. This was not the time for anything other than level. The public treaty archive under the outer boundary settlement, the survey completion records you mentioned, these are accessible through the standard archive protocol. Yes, I said. Every completed survey is filed there within 30 days of the run's end. The filing index is public. We have been filing consistently since the program began. A pause. I will be honest with you, Captain. No one in my delegation thought to look. There was nothing useful I could add to that, so I did not add anything. I have one further question, Rose said after a moment, purely for my own understanding. The relentless archive, she has no offensive armament. Correct. No defensive armament beyond basic point defense. Correct. You have been in this system for 12 days, operating alone. With 2 unmanned drone tenders, but yes. And in 12 days, alone, you have accumulated a survey record sufficient to establish full legal prior occupancy of an entire corridor zone under the outer boundary settlement. Yes, I said, that is what a deep survey run produces. The silence ran for 31 seconds, which I counted with the same precision I gave to everything worth measuring. The compact has been in this space for 212 years, Rose said. I know, I said. We have administrative archives, formal designation records, 2 centuries of institutional presence in this perimeter. I'm aware. We have never, said Rose quietly, encountered a methodology like yours. I thought about how to answer that for a moment, because the question deserved an honest answer and not a diplomatic one. We built the ships first, I said. Before we knew what we would find out here, before we knew whether there was anything to find. The doctrine requires presence before knowledge, survey before claim. That means putting a ship in the dark and letting it sit there and listen without knowing what it will hear or whether it will hear anything at all, for as long as the survey takes. That kind of work requires a particular patience. We have been practicing it for 22 years, and we have gotten, I think, reasonably good at it. Rose did not respond immediately. When the voice came back, it was quiet in a way that was different from the careful official register. Yes, Captain, I can see that you have. The channel closed. The compact delegation began its departure sequence at 1847 hours ship time. I watched the formation on the passive array display. 7 drives spinning up in sequence, the tight formation loosening into departure configuration, the administrative vessels going first, then the patrol frigates. The formal designation ship went third. I watched it complete its turn and align for the outbound vector, that particular hull, the one that had arrived with its filing prepared and its procedural sequence loaded, and felt no particular satisfaction, which was how I generally felt when things went as they should. Not pleased exactly, not triumphant, just confirmed. The work had produced the correct result. The work usually did when it had been done well. The diplomatic tender went last in the line, its heavy drives raising the reading on our thermal sensors as it brought power up to departure thrust. They're clear of the corridor entry point, Darv said, at 2003 hours. Jumped. No forward displacement, full departure. They're gone, ma'am. Log the departure, I said. Frake logged it without comment. Oswin was already back at her station. Hollies had started a new notation file on the asteroid belt mineralogical data, which had been accumulating quietly in the background all day, and was beginning to show a pattern worth tracking. The archive settled back into the rhythm that had governed the previous 11 days, unchanged, as though the compact 7-ship delegation had been a brief notation in the margin of a much longer document, which, from the ship's perspective, was precisely what it had been. I sat in the command chair for a while after and looked at the gas giant turning outside the viewport and thought about what had happened, not to process it, but to look at it properly while it was still fresh and clear. The thing that had unsettled Rose, I thought, was not the prior occupancy record itself. It was not the legal provision, or the survey mandate scope, or the resolution of the gravitational mapping data. Those were the form of it. What had unsettled Rose, what had produced that particular quality of silence when I said we had been doing this for 22 years, was what those things implied about the people who had produced them. The compact had 2 centuries. They had institutions, protocols, formal frameworks built over 212 years of administering territory they knew. They had come to the Sesavith corridor with all of that behind them, their procedures in order, their documentation prepared, confident in their methodology. And they had found us here, already present, already watching, 12 days deep into a 90-day run, with a data record so complete that it had made their own charts look like a sketch. We had not come to confront them. We had not known they were coming. We had not been here because of anything to do with the compact at all. We had been here because there was a corridor in the pending designation zone, and there were things in it that had not been recorded yet, and that state of affairs was, to our way of thinking, an open question requiring an answer. We had gone to provide the answer. That was the thing the compact had not encountered before, not the legal record, not the survey methodology, the disposition that had produced them. The decision, made 22 years ago by people none of whom were on this ship any longer, to go to the quiet places before they needed to be claimed, to look at them carefully and completely, and then to go to the next one. Because there was always a next one, and there was always work to do, and the universe was very large and enormously patient, and it would wait as long as it took for someone to come and look at it properly. We had decided to be the ones who did that work, not for any single corridor, for all of them. I thought about what Rose had said. The compact has never encountered a methodology like yours. I believed it. They had been administering known space. We had been mapping unknown space, which was a different thing entirely, requiring a different kind of machine and a different kind of person and a different kind of patience. The gap between those 2 orientations was not political and not military. It was epistemic. One approach produces administrators, the other produces witnesses, and a witness who has been somewhere for 12 days with a full passive array and the logs to prove it is not a political problem or a diplomatic problem. A witness is simply a fact. Facts, as I had observed over the course of a long career, have a particular quality. They are indifferent to whether you were expecting them. We were on day 13 when Oswin extended the thermal sweep of the fourth moon by another 16 degrees at doubled sensitivity, burning more array capacity than the baseline protocol specified. I approved the deviation without discussion when she filed the request. The numbers from the prior sweep justified it, and she knew I would agree. When the results came back at mid-afternoon, they confirmed the subsurface ocean hypothesis to a confidence interval high enough for a formal discovery notation. The first of the survey run. We spent the rest of the afternoon running the analysis. The geothermal model, a tidal stress mechanism, the gas giant slowly pulling the moon apart over geological time, the friction of that process generating heat enough to maintain liquid beneath the silicatized crust, was solid, internally consistent, supported by everything the data showed. If the confidence interval held and the follow-up sweeps confirmed what the thermal pattern was suggesting, the Sesavith corridor's fourth moon would be in the scientific literature within 5 years. Hollies built the geothermal model. He made no mass distribution errors this time. Oswin reviewed his work and told him the model was correct, in precisely those words, which for her was the equivalent of a commendation. He returned to his station, and his posture changed in the specific way of someone trying very hard not to look as pleased as they actually are. Day 17 confirmed the subsurface ocean at full discovery threshold. Day 22 produced the first significant mineralogical find in the asteroid belt, a dense iron-nickel seam of unusual purity, flagged for a follow-on industrial survey. Day 31 turned up something in the electromagnetic reconstruction data that Oswin annotated quietly, and at length without saying much about it to the rest of the bridge, which was usually a sign that she was working out something she did not yet want to be wrong about. Day 43 gave us the wreck. It was in a decaying orbit around the gas giant's second moon, a slow, century-long ellipse that would eventually bring it down in a spectacular atmospheric entry, though not in any time frame a human would observe. Metallic. Old. Not any hull design in our database, which was comprehensive enough that its absence was significant. Oswin's team spent 3 days on it before she flagged it for specialist attention and added a note to the survey record. Origin unknown. Age estimate ranging from 400 to 800 years, strongly recommended for dedicated investigation. The notation had the quality of something she found genuinely interesting, which was not her most common register. I found myself looking at the wreck's passive readings more often than strictly necessary. Whatever it had been out here for a long time, keeping its own kind of silence. The survey ran 91 days in total. We cataloged every body in the system above the minimum cross-section. We sampled the upper atmospheric bands of Vethoron remotely. We mapped the electromagnetic history of the corridor going back 4,000 years. We found the ocean. We found the mineral seams. We found the wreck. We filed everything, every notation, every flag, every data point in the format required and with the precision required. And on the morning of day 91, I stood at the navigation console with Solaris, and we set our course for home. I did not look back at Vethoron when we departed. I had spent 91 days looking at it carefully, and I had looked at it well. There was nothing more to see from this distance that the survey had not already captured. It was in the record. It would stay there. The Compact's formal withdrawal of their designation filing arrived in the Terran Navigational Authority's administrative record 11 days after our encounter. I saw the notation in the weekly bulletin that came through on the tight beam relay. 2 sentences, standard procedural language, citation to Article 7 of the Outer Boundary Settlement, no additional commentary. They had filed it correctly and efficiently, and they had not added anything unnecessary. That was the Compact's way, and it was a sensible way to handle a situation that did not require elaboration. I thought, reading that notification, about what Rose had said in the formal part of the conversation and in the part that had not been the formal part. The compact has been in this space for 212 years. We have records going back to our founding. We have never encountered a methodology like yours. I believed every word of it, and I believed that the compact would go back and look at the outer boundary settlement survey provisions with a care they had not previously brought to them, and that the next time a compact delegation entered a pending designation corridor, they would do so having checked the survey completion archive first. That was a reasonable response to a new fact, and it was what we would have done in the same position. I held no ill feeling toward Rose or Orem or any of the delegation. They had done their jobs. They had encountered something they had not anticipated. They had handled the encounter correctly once they understood what they were looking at. Those were not small things. What I was less certain about was whether they had fully understood the deeper thing. The thing not in the legal text or the procedural exchange or the formal record. The thing that was in the hull itself, in the design decision that had allocated the rear 2/3 of the ship to keeping the front third running, rather than to armament or crew or any of the things that a different orientation toward unknown space would have put there. We had not gone to the Sessavith corridor to beat the compact to it. We had not planned an interception. We had not anticipated their filing or chosen the corridor because of their interest in it. We had gone because there was a corridor in the pending designation zone, and there were things in it that no instrument had yet examined, and that state of affairs was simply a problem that the survey doctrine existed to solve. The compact's intentions had not been a variable in the calculation. They were not a variable now. That was the methodology Rose had said they had never encountered. Not the passive array, not the cartographic resolution, not the legal framework. The disposition that produced all of those things. The decision that there was work to be done in the quiet places, that the work was worth doing carefully and completely, and that the way to do it was to build the right kind of ship and put it there, and let it sit for as long as the work took, without urgency and without shortcuts. Because urgency and shortcuts produced records that a good analyst could pick apart, and the whole point was a record that held. We had been practicing that disposition for 22 years. We had gotten very good at it. I filed my end-of-run report within the standard window. 604 pages of compiled data, indexed and cross-referenced to the notation archive, discovery flags highlighted on the cover summary, the subsurface ocean and the mineral seams, and the wreck all clearly flagged with the appropriate confidence ratings and specialist recommendations. Oswin had written the 12-page summary section. It was, characteristically, exactly as long as the content required and no longer. The title of the report read, Sessavith Corridor Deep Survey Full Occupancy Record Day 1 through Day 91. Below it in the standard form field, Commanding Officer, Captain Elise Vardner, TFSN Relentless Archive. The report went into the archive. That was where it belonged. That was where all of it belonged, every system read, every notation made, every quiet signal received from a body that had been patiently emitting it for millions of years without any receiver present to receive it. It was in the record now. It would stay there. The universe does not organize itself into files. Somebody has to go out and read it and then come back and write it down. That is not a glamorous mandate, and it was never intended to be. It is patient work, slow work, work that requires you to sit in the dark for a long time and listen carefully to things that do not know they are being heard. It requires you to value what you find not because of what it is worth to anyone in a political or economic or strategic sense, but because it was unknown before you arrived, and it should not remain unknown simply because nobody bothered to go and look at it. That is the argument for the doctrine, and it is not a complicated argument. It is a very simple one. The universe is large and full of things that have never been seen, and that is a condition worth correcting, and somebody ought to go and correct it. We had decided, 22 years before I ever took command of this ship, that we were the ones who would do that work. We had built the machines for it and developed the doctrine for it and trained the people for it. And then we had sent them out, one survey at a time, to the corridors and the uncharted zones and the spaces where nobody had thought to look yet, not with any particular urgency. Urgency was the enemy of the work, the same way it was the enemy of good analysis. It made you cut corners you could not afford to cut, because in survey work a corner you cut today was a data gap in a record that was supposed to be permanent. We had learned to do it the slow way, the right way, and over 22 years of continuous deployment we had accumulated a body of work that was, when you placed it against the map of the outer perimeter, quietly enormous. The Compact had 212 years of presence in this space. They had administrative frameworks and designation records and institutional depth that we could not match in any dimension that had to do with managing territory that was already known. What we had was a different kind of depth, 78 days in a system that was not known and had not been known before we arrived, 91 days in total by the time we left. A data record that would take their analysts years to fully work through if they ever acquired it, covering every body in that system above minimum cross-section, going back 4,000 years in the electromagnetic reconstruction, with a subsurface ocean flagged for follow-up and a wreck that predated their entire polity sitting in a decaying orbit above the second moon, waiting for someone with the right questions. We had been there, we had looked, we had written it down. That was enough. That had always been enough. That was the whole point.